In this tutorial, we're going to show you how to use user triggers. These can be fired at any time in your animation, on any keyframe. That will just give you information that that keyframe fired. How this can be used, an example, and this is what we're going to do, is as the knight's swing, when he's coming down, we're going to make the sword swish. So it's really good for swishing sound or changing sounds in an animation or firing off sounds based on a keyframe. So let's go into our animation. Open up our editor. I'm back in the attack animation. And we're going to make this sword as it's coming up and coming down. At this keyframe where we switched our swishing sword, we switched the collider on, it's getting a lot of work in this one keyframe. So we're going to add one more thing, and that's a user trigger. That's all it is, just like that. So now when that's fired, it'll fire back, and if we've registered an event to trap it, we can do stuff with that. Let's go ahead and close this. Now let's set up something to actually happen, and in this case we're going to add a sound. So let's go to the knight. I'm adding a lot of things to the knight. You can put this in other logic. You don't have to add it to this because it's getting kind of full, but I want to play it here. So let's go ahead and add a component. Go to audio, audio source, and we're going to add an audio clip. I have a sound set up, a swishing sound. I actually need to make sure the swishing sound is not 3D. That way it doesn't matter how far back our camera is, it will capture it because our camera is our listener in this particular scene. Let's apply it. Go back to our knight. So we have a 2D sound. We don't want to play on awake because it's not going to swish with him just standing there. We're going to control the swishing ourselves. So we have that set up. So now what we need to do is go into our knight script and add a reference to that. And also we need to register our user trigger event. You notice I'm calling this sword hit and sword swish, but actually this is going to capture all colliders and all user triggers. I'm just calling them by the names that they're actually referencing explicitly in this tutorial. But again, you'd want to filter down which ones are actually happening at the event level. So again, this is just all collider hits, and we're looking at the weapon, but I'm calling it sword hit. Again, this user trigger, it's going to happen when all user triggers fire, so we need to actually filter it by the user trigger. So we call a sword swish function. The parameter is user trigger event, and we're giving that the variable name trigger event. So we've registered it here. So whenever user trigger fires, it's going to call this function. So this is where we filter down because it's going to capture, like I said, all user triggers. So if trigger, we can look at bone name. We can look at the frame that it occurs on. We can look at, again, the bone node index. We can look at the transform. Clip index is like stand is 0, walk is 1, attack is 2. Go to the frame, the normalized time. You can't see it on this, but you have sprite transform and the time. So there's different things we can filter it by. In this case, since there's no other user triggers, we wouldn't even need to have any filter, but I'm just going to leave it at weapon for now. That should be enough because it's the only user trigger we have, and it's the only one on weapon, so that should be enough for this case. But again, if you had a bunch of user triggers, you'd want to filter this down a bit, or you'd get this call every time one fired. So in this case, we're going to actually play our audio source, so the swish sound gets played when our user trigger fires for the weapon. Let's hit save. Go back here. And we want to make sure we attach our swish sound to this audio source parameter. So now when he swishes, or when he switches the sword, it should play this audio source. So let's go ahead and hit play and attack. You can hear it making the swish sound, hopefully. Let me turn it up just in case you can't. And it's firing at the apex. Same time, same frame where we're changing the swish, same frame we're adding the collider. That's probably the best way to use user triggers is for sound effects, but you can use them for anything. Okay, that's all for this tutorial.